History is often remembered through the lives of great leaders, men who built empires, inspired revolutions, and shaped the destiny of nations. But history is also written in the moments those lives were cut short. A single blade, a single bullet, one instant that sent shockwaves across centuries. Today, on Forgotten Chronicle HQ, we examine the most impactful assassinations throughout history. While the men in this video lived extraordinary lives, it was their deaths that created tidal waves of change, waves that still reverberate in the world we live in today. An assassination is never just the end of one person's story. It is the breaking point of history, the spark that ignites wars, the silence that stalls peace, or the act that dismantles entire systems of power. From the streets of ancient Rome to the battlefields of Europe, from the rise of empires to the struggles for freedom, these assassinations altered the very course of human civilization. Join us as we count down the 5 most impactful assassinations in history. Events where a single death reshaped nations, toppled leaders, and left a legacy that endures to this day. Our countdown begins in the ancient world with a king whose death opened the door for one of history's most legendary conquerors, Philip II of Macedon. Philip was no ordinary monarch. He had transformed Macedonia from a weak, fractured kingdom into the dominant power of Greece. Through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and military brilliance, he united the Greek city-states under his banner. And just as he prepared to launch a grand invasion of Persia, his life was cut short. In 336 BCE, during the wedding of his daughter, Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. The motives remain debated. A personal grudge, a plot by rivals, or even political intrigue. But the impact of this single act is undeniable. His death placed the crown on the head of his 20-year-old son, Alexander. And here is where the true tidal wave begins. Alexander the Great did not simply inherit his father's throne, he inherited his vision. Within just a decade, he conquered the greatest empire the world had known, Persia. He swept through Asia Minor, Egypt, and into India, carving out an empire stretching from Greece to the edge of the Himalayas. But Alexander's legacy was not just military. His campaigns spread Greek language, art, philosophy, and science across 3 continents. This cultural fusion, known as the Hellenistic Age, shaped medicine, astronomy, architecture, and politics for centuries. Cities he founded, like Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of knowledge and trade that influenced civilizations long after his empire collapsed. All of that, the rise of Alexander, the spread of Hellenistic culture, the reshaping of the ancient world, traces back to one moment: the assassination of Philip II. Without it, the course of history might never have given us Alexander the Great, and the world we live in today could look very different. Our next assassination takes us to the United States in the mid-19th century, at the very moment the nation had survived its greatest trial, the Civil War. At the center of that storm was President Abraham Lincoln, a man whose leadership had preserved the Union and brought an end to slavery. But just as victory was secured, Lincoln's life was violently cut short. On April 14, 1865, only days after General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox, Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. There, actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth slipped into the president's box and shot him at point-blank range. Lincoln died the next morning, the first U.S. president to to be assassinated. The timing could not have been more devastating. Lincoln had spoken of reconciliation and healing, malice toward none, charity for all, envisioning a gentler Reconstruction that would reintegrate the South and protect the freedom of millions of formerly enslaved people. His death shattered that vision. Instead, Reconstruction fell into the hands of leaders who struggled to balance punishment and progress. The South resisted, federal policies faltered, and within decades, the rise of Jim Crow laws stripped away many of the freedoms Lincoln had fought to secure. Racial tensions that echo into modern America can be traced back, in part, to the power vacuum his death created. Beyond the United States, Lincoln's assassination also reverberated worldwide. Leaders in Europe saw how fragile democracy could be, while reformers and abolitionists everywhere lost a powerful symbol of freedom and unity. What might America, and perhaps the modern world, have looked like if Lincoln had lived to guide the Reconstruction? It remains one of history's greatest what-ifs. The bullet that ended Lincoln's life did not just take a president. It changed the path of a nation, leaving consequences still felt over 150 years later. At number 3, we move to India, and to a man whose very name became synonymous with peace. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, known as Mahatma or Great Soul, was not a king or a president. He wielded no army, commanded no empire. Instead, his power came from a weapon far stronger, the moral force of non-violence. For decades, Gandhi led India's struggle for independence from British rule through peaceful protest, civil disobedience, and sheer resilience. His philosophy of satyagraha, truth force, inspired millions of Indians to stand against colonial power without raising a sword. By 1947, Britain's empire in India collapsed, and the nation was free. But independence came with a terrible price: partition. India was divided into 2 states, India and Pakistan, sparking one of the largest and bloodiest mass migrations in human history. Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs clashed in violence that left nearly 1 million dead. And in the midst of this chaos, Gandhi became the loudest voice, calling for peace, reconciliation, and unity. It was this very call for harmony that made him a target. On January 30th, 1948, Gandhi was shot 3 times at point-blank range by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who believed Gandhi's efforts at reconciliation betrayed Hindu interests. At that moment, India lost not just its spiritual leader, but its moral compass. The impact of Gandhi's death was immense. His absence deepened the divide between Hindus and Muslims, entrenching the hostility that still shapes relations between India and Pakistan today. Globally, his assassination sent shockwaves across movements for justice, from Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States to Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Leaders drew inspiration from Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence. His death turned him into a martyr, amplifying his message even as it deprived the world of his living guidance. In killing Gandhi, his assassin hoped to silence him. Instead, Gandhi's death ensured that his legacy of peace would echo louder than ever, even as the subcontinent that fought to unite slipped further into division. At number 2, we come to an assassination that didn't just change a nation, it set the entire world on fire. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, heir to the Habsburg throne, was not a particularly beloved figure. But his death would trigger a chain reaction that plunged humanity into its first global conflict. On June 28, 1914, while visiting Sarajevo, Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist. The shots that rang out on that street became the spark that ignited World War I. What followed was not just a regional conflict, but a war that spread across continents, drawing in empires and colonies alike. The assassinations set off a domino effect of alliances and ultimatums. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany joined Austria. France and Britain answered in defense of their allies. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed in war. The results were catastrophic. 4 years of trench warfare left over 16 million dead and 20 million wounded. Ancient empires, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman, Russian, and eventually German, collapsed. Borders were redrawn, revolutions ignited, and the seeds of future conflict were planted. And the impact didn't end there. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war, imposed crushing penalties on Germany, fueling resentment that gave rise to Adolf Hitler and World War II. The collapse of empires reshaped the Middle East, setting the stage for decades of turmoil. The United States emerged as a global power, while Europe was left shattered. In many ways, the modern world, its borders, its conflicts, its politics, can be traced back to the gunshots in Sarajevo. Few assassinations in history have unleashed such a tidal wave of global consequences. Franz Ferdinand may not have lived to see the throne, but his death altered the course of the 20th century, plunging humanity into its bloodiest age. Number 1 stands perhaps the most famous assassination in all of history, the murder of Julius Caesar. Unlike others on this list, his name has become inseparable from the very act itself. To be stabbed in the back, or to face an Ides of March moment, these phrases live on because of him. By 44 BCE, Caesar had risen from a Roman general to dictator for life, reshaping the Republic into his own vision of centralized power. He had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, defeated Pompey, and concentrated authority in his own hands. To his supporters, he was a visionary who ended years of civil war and promised stability. To his enemies, he was a tyrant in waiting, threatening to destroy centuries of Republican tradition. The conspiracy against him was vast. Over 60 senators, men who once owed their careers to Caesar, including his close ally Brutus, took part. On the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BCE, they surrounded him on the Senate floor. In a storm of daggers, Caesar was stabbed 23 times. According to legend, his last words were, "Et tu, Brute?" a famous Latin phrase meaning "you too, Brutus." Not just shock at betrayal, but the realization that Rome itself had turned on him. But what followed was not the salvation of the Republic as the conspirators had hoped. Instead, it unleashed chaos. Riots erupted in Rome, and power struggles consumed the state. Caesar's assassination became the trigger for a final, bloody round of civil wars. From that chaos emerged Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, who defeated his rivals and became Augustus, Rome's first emperor. The death of one man ended nearly 500 years of the Roman Republic and gave birth to the Roman Empire. That empire would shape law, government, architecture, and culture for centuries across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Even today, echoes of Rome's empire remain in our languages, our politics, and our ideals of power. So here's the question. Was Caesar's assassination truly the most impactful in history? Or does that title belong to Archduke Franz Ferdinand? Caesar's death transformed Rome, and in turn, the foundations of Western civilization. It was a slow-burning impact, felt across centuries. But Franz Ferdinand's assassination lit the fuse to World War I, an event whose shockwaves were immediate and global. It led to the deaths of millions, collapsed empires, and set the stage for World War II, the Cold War, and the shape of the modern world we know today. One assassination changed the ancient world forever. The other reshaped the modern age in an instant. So which was greater? The Ides of March in Rome or the gunshots in Sarajevo? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into the turning points of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here on Forgotten Chronicle HQ for more history legends.